Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 21st, 2025, and today I want to jump back in time about 5 months ago, to the 2024 presidential election, talking about the margins at which states went towards Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to reformat and reshape what we view as swing states in the next presidential election. I know it seems quite early, but back in 2017, I was creating videos just like this one, talking about what might be competitive on the national stage. And one thing that really struck me was looking back at those videos. You can look at them all. They're entirely still up. I started the channel in June of 2017. You can see that a lot of those states that we predicted and foretold to be competitive weren't just competitive in 2020, but also again in 2024. I'm thinking states like Georgia and Arizona, that the 2016 election was a warning sign, an indicator to both Republicans and Democrats that certain states were going to be more competitive. Back in 2012, Obama barely visited Arizona and Georgia, yet overwhelmingly came to states like Ohio, Florida, and Iowa, all states now the Democrats would largely see out of reach. And so in just a few elections, the states that might have been more solid and safe towards a specific candidate and towards a specific political party might no longer be that way in coming elections. And so what I wanted to do was take a look at the 2024 election and show you all of the states that were just on a visual map that were decided by less than 10 points and really discuss the implications of the states outside of that 10-point margin. Again, previous swing states like Iowa, Ohio, and Florida, which coincidentally, all of which are outside of now that 10-point margin, and talk about the states that lie within inside it, because it is going to be quite interesting. Now, I'm sure you can predict that the overwhelming majority of states across the country were decided by margins of more than 10 points. These are states that are traditionally very lopsided in favor of a specific political party, and they generally do vote that way in almost every single type of election, barring a few gubernatorial races and, uniquely specific powerful Republicans in states like Vermont and New Hampshire. And New Hampshire really isn't a safe Democratic state, but certainly quite interesting, if you ask me. And so looking at our map here, you're seeing that it is really forming out to be that the overwhelming majority of states do fit into the characterization of being decided by margins of more than 10 points. This includes states like Florida, Texas, Alaska, Ohio, Iowa, all states that were on the radar for Democrats as hypothetically going to be more competitive later down the line, that we very quickly learned in the last election might not be as soon as Democrats would have hoped. And so in characterizing all of these states, I'm just going to double check on the 2nd congressional district there. I think that was right. All of the remaining states on your screen right now were decided by margins of less than 10 points. Colorado actually not. Let me go ahead and characterize that over there, but New Mexico, yes. And that leaves us with roughly 143 remaining electoral votes that are competitive to the degree that they were decided by less than 10 in the last election. Now, I remember the last election really came and went in a way that it was very quick in the evening, and Democrats really lost ground in a number of states, including states that they used to have a very strong history of being able to not necessarily win outright, but be at least competitive in. States like Iowa, states like Ohio, both of which were more competitive in the day and age of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, that refused to be competitive this time around. Decided by voting for Trump by margins of 13 points, 11 points in Ohio, moving these states out of even the bare minimum for being a competitive state. Florida, too, suffered a major blow to Democrats who had hoped that maybe there would be some type of reversal from 2022. And in a way, there was, right? In 2022, we saw that Ron DeSantis won that state of Florida, Marco Rubio as well, won by pretty substantial margins. Was able to win the state by 19 points, 18 points. Then came 2024. Democrats were hoping they'd bring it down to less than 10 points, right? A completely new electorate, maybe some lost support for Donald Trump in the state. Clearly, that was not the case. It voted for Trump by 1 point in 2016, 3 points in 2020, and then 13 points in 2024, removing the state from the competitive column as well. And while the rest of these states I really wasn't shocked by, I think the removal of Colorado really solidifies it as a very lockstep, solid Democratic state, but the inclusion of New Jersey is a state that really baffles me, just because it's a state that, alongside the Eastern Seaboard, really did shift in a monumental way. And it wasn't necessarily a shift from the Philly suburbs. I mean, although we did see some shifts in areas, Salem County, Camden County, Gloucester County, Cumberland County, right? Massive shifts. way more massive ones in the area surrounding New York City, right? You can see shifts here, 19 points more Republican, 13 points more Republican, and even within New York City, you can see that it is the suburbs in this region that drove the rightward shift in New York. The rest of the state largely very mute in comparison, especially in comparison to the rest of the nation. In fact, many of these counties, it seems a little bit weird to say, but actually shifted less than the rest of the nation, therefore was actually more favorable towards Democrats than New York City. But New York was actually carried down to just a 12.8% margin for Kamala Harris. New Jersey went from being a state that Biden won in the last race, I can show you here, by 15 points, down to being a state that Kamala Harris won by 5.9%, a 10-point reduction in just 4 years. It brought the state into being one of the states that will be on the radars for Democrats and Republicans in 2028. It's 14 electoral votes. There's a very competitive gubernatorial race this coming November that will be a very big test for Democrats in this state. But what it shows is that we have absolutely an evolving electorate. If I was to do this map back in 2012, and you know what, we actually can, what we can do here is just take the margins and we make every state that was decided by 10 points safe, right? Anything more than 10 points. We throw likely in there too. I guess that sort of reduces it down. Forgive me. Let me just do 10.1, or maybe I'm doing this wrong. Point being that I'm really losing it here. But the point is that all of the states that were decided by less than 10 points are the states that are not currently characterized as safe. You can see here that those are states like Florida, states like Ohio, states like Iowa, yes, even Missouri. There are a number of states here that were overwhelmingly in favor of Obama, such as New Jersey, that weren't on the radar back in 2012, that are on the radar today. Because 3 elections later, a lot changes. And although a lot stays the same, right? Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, these states all stay the same. You remove Iowa, you remove Colorado, you remove Missouri, you remove Ohio, you remove Florida, with its then 29 electoral votes, now 30 electoral votes. Very interesting if you ask me. If you go to 2016, we do the same thing. But Texas was actually in that competitive range. Now Trump has won the state by 14 points. It's no longer in that competitive range. Florida was in that competitive range. Again, even with Hillary Clinton, who many Democrats say suffered arguably in the vibes of it all, a bigger loss than Kamala Harris, though not by the numbers, and Hillary Clinton did win the national popular vote. It was the fact that Hillary Clinton was expected to win by a massive amount, lost the election, but even then she kept Iowa in that range, Ohio in that range, and Trump too kept Colorado in that range, no longer, right? And so looking at the map for 2028, I can imagine there will be a huge set of investments yet again in the Rust Belt, but I imagine Democrats won't even think of the idea of investing in Florida, investing in Texas, investing in Iowa and Ohio. And although Texas, I think, is the one state that, although it did have a reversal, can be somewhat of good news for Democrats later down the line, in that the Senate race was far more competitive. It was single digits. Democrats did have a brand problem in Texas, but it really was contained to the presidential. You can see the Democrats did lose some ground amongst House races, certainly, but keeping them way more competitive and way more lopsided and in favor of the Democratic Party than the presidential is good news. In Florida, it's a lost cause, right? In Iowa and Ohio, lost cause. Sherrod Brown lost Ohio. Iowa, and though Sherrod Brown, might be running for governor, might be running for Senate, who knows what's going to happen there. Ohio's a state where Democrats, truly, if they believe they're competitive there, something must be entirely off about the election. Because Ohio, Iowa, Florida all share a same characterization now, in that they are overwhelmingly in favor of the Republican Party. Now, Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Mexico, all states that Democrats won in 2020 by comfortable margins, were probably hoping that these states wouldn't be as competitive, right? If Republicans were going to lock down Iowa and Ohio, states that were decided by roughly similar margins in the last race, we can look in 2020, if you're just using it as a point of comparison, you will see that in 2020, right, what happened? If we adjust the margins back to what they normally are, likely being 5 and then safe being 15, you'll find that, Colorado, New Mexico, double-digit margins, right? Iowa and Ohio, 8-point margins. You'd suggest that if Republicans were locking up Iowa and Ohio, Democrats would be locking up New Mexico. Arguably even Minnesota, which was 7 points. New Hampshire, which was 7.4%. Virginia, which was 10.1%. It was outside that battleground state margin. No longer. So Democrats are going to be navigating an electoral map here that is far more favorable to the GOP at baseline as well. It used to be different. In 2016, Democrats were relying on New Mexico and Nevada and Virginia on history, which meant that those states were going to go to the Democratic Party regardless of how Trump was doing. The Rust Belt was really where he shined through. Even in 2016, Trump lost Nevada. In 2020, he also lost Nevada. In 2024 was the first time a Republican had won it in 20 years on the national stage. And so you can see why Democrats, were starting with an electoral college advantage in the past that they no longer hold today. In fact, Republicans start off with 218 electoral votes, while Democrats start off with 177, meaning that at baseline, Republicans have that upward advantage that makes it very difficult for Democrats to see a pathway to victory, unless they overperform. Granted, Democrats will probably win Minnesota again and Virginia and New Jersey, but they are now going to need to invest in those states when in the past they really didn't think that was necessary. Even with Tim Walz on the ballot in Minnesota, it was a state that Kamala Harris won by less than Biden, a 4-point margin, and their sitting governor, popular at that, probably is going to run for a third term, probably can and will win a third term. The margin reduced down to 4 points from 7 points when not a single person on the ticket was heralded from the state of Minnesota. So looking forward to 2028 and even 2026, Democrats have their work cut out for them. They're going to need to win back a lot of support in a number of states that are very diverse. The Republicans, just if you give them a couple, right, give them Georgia, give them North Carolina, give them Arizona. All it takes from here is one Rust Belt state, and they win the presidency. That's 3 out of what? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 swing states. They get 3 of them in states that they won pretty comfortably in the last election. North Carolina by nearly 4 points, Georgia by 2 points, Arizona by nearly 6 points. You take those away from the Democrats, they're at a disadvantage because even in their best case, they can't outperform Biden. They can't outperform even Trump any of his elections. They can't outperform Obama. In fact, it would be one of the tighter margins in comparison to any election in the 21st century. The only one that would be closer is the one right at the start in the year 2000, which was notoriously close. But besides that, Democrats are so limited. Lose Wisconsin, lose the election. Lose Michigan, lose the election. Lose Pennsylvania, you know the rest. The point is that the map here is not necessarily conducive to Democratic victories in the future, which is why it's going to be an uphill battle, even if they do well in the midterms, and even if they do well in special elections, and really prove their worth. This map here has been built in a way because of Trump's margin in 2024, that it will take yet again another redefinition of what the electoral map looks like, which voting groups vote for who, because right now we're in a realignment period, it seems. It may not be clear until a few elections later down the line, but Democrats are starting to become a party that has more reliable voters, but as a result is growing in their electorate in the demographic range of being whiter, wealthier, right? More educated. The same type of electorate that was the day and age of the Romney era, Boston HQ type of thing, that is now becoming more indicative of the Democratic Party. And not to say the Democrats aren't still comprised of a majority-minority, right, electorate or primary voting base. That is absolutely true, but you start to see something slip. And election after election, 2016 was the first. Saw some reversal there in terms of minority support. 2020, we saw it again. 2024, we saw it in a wide range, especially amongst young voters, who now we see in new polling favored Trump more heavily than their older counterparts in the same Gen Z, right? Ages 23 to 28 are more favorable to Democrats, and ages 18 to 22 are more favorable towards Republicans. It's a whole weird day and age of American politics. But it does explain some of these shifts. It does explain this new evolving electoral map, and Democrats and Republicans are going to have to evolve to it too. And so looking at our electoral map here, Democrats start off with roughly 177 electoral votes, Republicans at 218. And this isn't to write off Democrats in 2028 by any metric, but it does mean that in order to win, they need to go above and beyond. It isn't just going to take a few swing states. That's what it took for Hillary Clinton. You flip 3 states that were decided by margins, then less than 1 point, she would have won the election. That is not the case for Kamala Harris in 2024, and that is not the case for Democrats in 2028. As I said in the beginning of this video, the Democrats clearly have their work cut out for them. The question is, will they get to it? Will they do it? These midterms will be indicators, but 2018 did not predict 2020 in the way the Democrats did not win in a landslide in 2020. It was a Democratic trifecta, but an extremely close one at that relied on a runoff election in Georgia, a day before an insurrection from an outgoing unpopular president. A president who is now president again in 2025, who redefined the election in 2024. So, closely watch these swing states, closely watch these battlegrounds as they evolve, as they hold elections between now and November of 2028, because it will tell a story. Tell a story of a reshaped American political future. And it will be one that is worth watching, because right now it's very interesting to see, but these swing states, maybe swing states for the next couple of election cycles, this one marks the first moment for them, and a whole new wave of investments and party infrastructure that some of these states have namely never seen before the 2024 election that will likely see them for the next couple of decades. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.